Yeah, okay. These people, man. Yep, WTO is moving. I'm still in WTO. It's up 30%. 551 pre-market, 40 now. Yeah. Yep. So this is what I was like talking about on AMC. We have a very, very comparable setup to what happened in March of 2022. I've been talking about this for a little while now. Getting a lot of people who are kind of all over the place today with their flip-flopping. And, you know, I came on here, I was waiting for the move. One way or the other, it was going to happen. We'll see if it follows through. Volume's got to keep this pace for a while, so we're not out of the woods yet, but it's definitely looking promising. The gap's been filled. When we made that gap after that upthrust, part of me just decided to hold on a little more and not let go of that possibility that this could be a turnaround moment. Now, that being said, you got 50 minutes left in the day. You got to keep it. You got to keep the move. You got to keep the volume up. The point of this is not to just kind of up thrust and then come back down. You know, you don't really want to do that. You don't want to have repeated moves through this creek. You want to finally jump it and hold it. So the key here is as follows. I mean, you can kind of tell where it is, but it's basically this little pocket right here needs to hold. And beyond that, you should just see upside. I mean, it's that simple. So I shared this with the Discord group today, and I know a lot of you guys, maybe not on there, but it's important to note that like some days I can't stream very much for like a lot of reasons. Today there was a couple different reasons that I just didn't stream early in the day. And if the price is not really moving much, then it's not really like a huge deal to me to like not get on. So whether it's big swings down or big swings up, when we pushed up right before earnings, I had this idea in my head that there was two things. There's two truths, and both were kind of anti-truths. Like they're both is dialectic. Like they're both true, but there was a problem. And it seems like that problem might be resolved. So one of the truths is that this push-up seemed like that was the end of what I would call like a parabolic motion, and that this was a pullback to a support at 436. It was right where it was supposed to be. Like it pushed up, it pushed a resistance on the creek, it almost hit it perfectly, and then it rejects back down. That's true. And so it does do the push-up, it seems to go parabolic, and then it drops back down to support. So I had kind of estimated that that might be where this little red marker is. I know that this is not meant to be like perfectly one-to-one, but if you're thinking about a breakout, then there has to be similar moves. So it's true that it made the advancement and then it had this pullback to a level that I would have been comfortable with if we had just stayed there. Okay? But then something weird happens, which is we get this secondary move all the way up. Now this is also true. This is actually the first time that we pushed above the top. at 468. So when we advanced back here, if you guys recall, and there was a couple people who were pretty smart about it in the Discord group because they asked me about it right away. They said, well, did it go high enough? Because it didn't go up past 472 or whatever. It didn't go past 468 or 469. I had estimated maybe 472. Then it just kind of pushed slightly above the top here. And there were other reasons I thought maybe 472. Never did it, right? So there was a problem, which was also true, which is that it never actually pushed resistance. So weirdly enough, if I had kind of estimated maybe where we were here, I would have said that this looked like a move up that was pushing against the resistance of the creek, but not the resistance support level, or not the level of resistance like, monetarily. And then it didn't do that till the secondary motion. Let me just add a third truth to that. The third truth is that, and all of these things are true, like totally made sense that this was the push up against that creek and a backup and then a breakout. Totally made sense. It is. I mean, it's exactly the way it looks. But then this is also true that it really technically didn't push up higher than the September 30th top until it went up here right before earnings. Also, that's the second truth. Third truth, okay, is that motion then immediately sold back down beneath the creek, which tends to be a distributive action. It doesn't look bad, right? Remember this? And I said it, like I said as much, it didn't make any sense because it went above and it actually held the creek during the daytime. It held right here. It didn't break down. And I think I mentioned it in our chat, and I mentioned it in the video. I said there really wasn't anything you could do. It did not look bearish at first because it pushed up, and yeah, there was a cat ear, but then the problem is it held. So it's like, well, what's the intention of the operator then? And so part of me was wondering if somebody just took it up to sell it back down so they could buy back in. It sounds weird. Now, there could be an element of shorting going on, that somebody needed to get out of a short position that they entered. Maybe they entered a short position back here below when they dropped it through like 435, for example. And then when they saw that it was going to run, they decided to take it back down and then cover their short position. But in order to do that, they flushed it to the upside. It's like a lot of if-then statements that are very like hypothetical, and you're like, well, you can't really be sure, right? No, but there's something about it that just gnawed at me because it was obviously like holding. It had made the appropriate moves. Well, I went back and looked at it today, and the only thing I said to the group was, look, like it technically made a bearish move by jumping up and going down. And we all know that. But at the same time, and it dropped the ice here, but at the same time, it's got to fill this gap, which means it's gonna do it. I know it's gonna do it. It's gonna come back up. It runs 6% at the end of the day, right? It's gonna come back up to 458. It's gonna make the move. What that does is it puts it in a weird position where it's either doing a final distributive action or it's about to break out and run. If it's about to break out and run, then I misjudged what this was. And in fact, this is not the push. This is the push. And so I drew a diagram this morning, and I shared it, I don't know, like 10 a.m. this morning or something on the Discord group. This is what I was talking about. You have the same move here with the wave out, but it never needed to come low again. Back in March, on Monday and Tuesday, March 21st, 22nd, it came down and pushed low, and this would have been like our 436 if we had done it by levels. But if you do it by creeks, it's actually much lower because technically the creek is way down here. Guess what? We went down to 417. We hit it right on the dot, very close to where they were in that after-hours session, very close to what now appears to be a floor. So I don't want to be like that guy, right, who's like, I told you so. You know, this is the kind of attitude that gets people really annoyed with people. But like, the reason that that's a possibility is because they did the advancement after that actually pushed higher. So like, the only major issue with this upthrust was not that it went up that high. I don't really think that matters too much. I think the only major issue is that it then came back down low and it broke through local creeks and it broke through the major one. But this is the one that ultimately I was like, you know what? When it waved up, it never came back down again. It checked it on the way out, but it never came back down. And this did not make, this is really important, I could not shake this feeling. This did not make, it's like so like nitpicky, right? You guys are like, well, it's not even over, Booksy. No, it's not. But listen, if it reverses here, it's going to be really strong. And I got to tell you, if it reverses here, this is basically like a double flush, but it's technically like a fake breakdown of this widening as well, which is a really powerful move. The thing that gets me was that when it came back down on this widening right before earnings on November 5th, again, we mentioned this on the stream, I guess it was last week now. I don't know. It feels like forever ago, but it probably was just a week ago. It didn't come to the bottom, and I thought that was very strange because it's usually a sign of strength. And I was like, it's usually a strong sign if you don't return to the bottom of a structure. That was more significant than I gave it credit for, because in the reality of this is that this never made a lower low. Like, it doesn't change direction until when? Like, it didn't change direction until this moment on the 6th. So where I had kind of originally drawn this out was that this was your parabolic move, so this should have been the pullback. That makes this look like a head fake with a drop. But taking that further and saying, well, technically it did not break down here, it never made a lower low, it didn't break the trend, could just indicate that it wasn't finished. And then technically, again, with the red marker that I've got on the chart, it never pushed the resistance until that earnings move, which means this could have all been part of that parabola, and then this is just a backup to the creek, much like you had Monday and Tuesday, March 21st and 22nd. So the follow through from this point is actually very straightforward. You need to see it spend a good amount of time. An hour is great, but honestly, I would love to see it just kind of keep bleeding up right here with a lot of volume. Hold the support right where it's at, not drop back below again. It's got good volume coming in. I want more volume. It should be a buy-in, like an operator buy-in. When we wait for this moment, I've been saying it for a while. And I know you guys are kind of annoyed with me saying even that much, but we've been talking about it for a while. And one of the things we talked about was like, where is the buy-in? And I said that it really wasn't, you're not going to get much of a buy-in on this move until, that's kind of the move right there, except ours came way down, right? You're not going to get a buy-in on the move until the SOS and the breakout, which means you're not really going to see a heavy amount of volume until right here on this move. This is a diagram I'm just drawing on the side here, and right here, which should be when it jumps the creek and holds. That's the same place you see the volume pick up in March. It's not a mystery why, because there's a gentle buy-in that's already occurred. We're back down here when everybody thinks it's a bear flag. If it's a successful bear trap, then they're going to get enough selling pressure to take it down one more time, and then they're going to buy in again, and that's really when the volume should pick up. That's when you see the major like institutional volume come in, the smart money buy-in. So if this holds, it should be, I don't want to say smooth sailing, but it should be high volume from here on. And then, you know, we go further with it. You can see like I haven't really adjusted too much on my chart at all, except just to talk about downside somewhat. We were talking about the possibility of downside. You should see it push right here in this pocket. There could be a little shakeout motion, but then you should see it push all the way up to the SOS around 6, if it's actually what I think it is. Okay? So in theory, will we just kind of gap up and run? I don't know. Maybe, you know, if this continues into extended hours, we could have a huge gap or something. Otherwise, you're really looking at you would just really want to see it kind of hold here, maintain volume, and then just continue to the upside. Okay. Now, evidently, according to our resident bear in our Discord, evidently everybody flip-flopped. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. And I don't want to be, again, that guy. I'm not pointing fingers at other people, but I definitely came on here last week and said that I will own up to being bullish if this doesn't go my way. I will say I was wrong because I've been very adamant that I think it's going to go a certain way. And every time we go through these motions, man, it's like there's a lot of risk involved because you just don't know until the end. You got to see the breakout. And even in the end here, you get this scary flush. And everybody and their grandma's talking about a dead stock that is going to keep bleeding downward and all this stuff. I'll tell you right now, guys, if this does indeed run, I'll be okay, like financially. You know, it'll hopefully work out in my favor. But like, if it does indeed, and so will you hopefully, but if it does indeed run, the one thing I never want to kind of have to deal with again. I'm in a bit of an angry bull mood right now. I don't want to deal with people telling me that nobody knows what's going to happen. I don't want to deal with people telling me that you can't anticipate institutional movement. I just don't want to hear it. And even in the event that this breaks to the downside, like I was more than willing, and I still am more than willing to say I was wrong. I am. People don't like it when people are arrogant, but sometimes you get it right. Sometimes you get it really freaking right. And it's not arrogance to say you get it right. So we'll see. We're going to watch it. I don't want to overspeak. We're not quite there yet. We need to see a support build right here. I think it's going to end up being kind of right where it's at 460. That was the area that we dropped on the way down. So there was a little bit of a cat ear kind of section right here. It's a little bit, let's just say it is definitely in a lot of ways like a floor. So we want that to be recaptured. I think that's where the battle's going to happen. I think we might have a little bit of a shakeout right here back to 450. If it can hold 450, you should see 460. And then at that point, you'd be good to go. Like there's nothing else there. So you should just bleed up from there all the way back to, and all the way back to the SOS. So the setup just I could not let it go. Like it's like deja vu. Like I've been here before, seen this kind of garbage before. Something off about it. That action itself was distributive, but there's just something about it that just really rubbed me the wrong way. Couldn't let it go. I think that's the instinct that you need to kind of like take into consideration. So in theory, this should go up to at least 603 if it makes the move. So the backup point is really important. In 2020, I made a diagram about this a long time ago, but there's a lot of 50-50s. And one of the weirdest ones that I found was the backup point ends up being a near 50-50 swing of this drop level right here. So if you go to like where the drop level was, right around this point, now it says like $98. This ends up being almost a perfect 50-50 into the SOS, which is right over the top. If it were to be the exact same or very similar, this actually goes a little bit higher than that drop point. Drop point's like right there. And this 50-50 goes slightly higher than that. If it ends up being the exact same, this is going to be up maybe like there. We've been talking about 620s. Based on the way this went, I think it could be about 610. You might not think that's high enough, but it actually is fine. It just has to be above $6. So it really makes very little difference in some ways. As long as it's above, it's like $5.97 or $5.96. SOS is an SOS. It just has to push it. So this movement, and you can see like a little bit of life there in that volume. It's coming in. I don't think that's even the half of it. I think we should see a significant increase, an uptick it's not just going to be like a bunch of shorts covering. It's going to be buyers buying, like your operator buying in. So you seem more confident on AMC than WTO. I think we're going to, I think it's the same. I think it's the same thing I've been talking about for a long time. I don't want to sit here and just change stuff because of an 8% move. I mean, I'm happy it's up. I want it to hold. If I'm right, it's going to go up pretty far. I think it's going to go up to the 9s before it's done. Even if I'm wrong and it doesn't go that high, we should at least get to 6s, because the whole point of this, if it does drive up to distribute, would be to go back to the top. So I'm like not really like any different, and there's nothing changed. Like, it's not like you have any significant change in terms of how far it goes. The PNF for this has been really high for a while, up near like 16 or something. I had surmised 13s as possible, and then we've talked about it. I'm almost certain it's going to hit 869, and that's going to be the turnaround point. That's my opinion about it. I think this is what we're going to see, a big push up to about 869, and then we're going to kind of nosedive for pretty much 5 months. So that's a bit maybe sad sounding, but that's kind of where I've been at for a while. So if it can make this move, it should just go. And it should go pretty far. Yeah, and I genuinely believe that to some degree that I'm doing it right. So, you know, a little bit of confidence goes a long way. Maybe it can become a little bit arrogant, but I genuinely believe I've been doing it right. So I have no reason to doubt that this is the target at this point, if it continues. The thing is like every level here is going to be checked and every level has to be confirmed. So, I mean, confirmation started now when it jumped back over. Now you have to confirm it by holding the support. If it can jump over and hold that support and it holds it into the end of the day, I think that's pretty strong. If instead it bleeds back down to like 445, that could be a sign of weakness on the part of bulls, like it's a false takeoff again, and then you're looking at basically a double up thrust. Why wouldn't it break past the 9s? I don't know, man. I've been on and on and on about this for a while. If it's going to go back down and get the fill and complete, then I don't think it's going to need to go past the 9s. It's about an operator endgame. And long story short, you have a humongous downtrend marker there at 869. And it's also mathematically a perfect level to then flush back through and get to your gap by about March of next year. If you're looking for somebody who's going to just provide a lot of hopium because it's running up, that I'm not the guy, okay? Why not? I just told you. Because you don't need it. I appreciate you being on here, I do, but I also, I've been talking about the same thing for months, so I'm not going to go back through like a month's worth of TA in like 5 minutes. People come on because they're excited and they want to see like what I have to say. I'm telling you what I have to say, but I'm also not going to sit here and say, oh, trust me, bro. Like, I'm trying to give you legitimate reasons, but if you don't hear them, that's not on me. You know, you can just say like, oh, it's going to run. It just keeps running. I don't think it's going to do that. I've already made a case for why I think this goes up here. I think it has to do with these parallel structures. I think it's going to be like 2020. I think we're looking for a phase B kind of top. Originally, I thought it'd come higher than the previous top, up to 13s. But the more I looked at it, the more I feel like that doesn't even seem remotely necessary. It just has to come up to this channel right here and retest it. It's like a downward channel. It's not horizontal. If it goes for the upper echelon of it, it's going to probably go to like 1380. That's still my upper target. I don't think it goes beyond that. I don't. I mean, if it runs up hard, maybe it hits the 13s, but that's where the creek is, and I don't think we're going to jump it. So I don't think we're going to go beyond that. But it's kind of clear to me, like looking back on it, why we would only go this far. Like why we don't need to go any farther. And the fact is that that gives you enough ammunition to get down to the gap fill, stage of balance, and then sell off going into next May. And I still think the big run up is in June of next year, the big one. I think this is a massive bottom, like a macro bottom. And it's not done yet. So exciting as it is to be up 6.5%, we need to hold some levels so that we can see continuation. And then at the end of the day, that's my TA. I could be wrong. It's okay. If it comes up here and it breaks out, and then it comes up here and then breaks out, you know, goes past 869, goes past 1380, all that stuff's fine. Like, good for us. We're going to make money. But at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to change my TA when it's green, and I'm not going to change my TA when it's red. Like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't think it pushes up here in order to continue indefinitely. I think it pushes up here in order to sell down again early next year or even late this year. I think the market's going to rally and then start really selling off, like kind of settle in. And I think some of these stocks like AMC, maybe GME, they might get a pretty big hit, knockdown when that happens. So, someone had mentioned WTO. It's not everybody's favorite, but it is one we were looking at. You know, it's close to breaking out. I'm not particularly excited about it until it pushes above like maybe 43 cents here. And then again, it has to push above 50. So the SOS for this is about 50 cents. It needs to come up pretty high. So I'm just kind of waiting on it. I'm in it. I bought more low, but I'm also like waiting for that bounce and that recovery. This is what I had on the chart when it started dropping down about a week ago now. Thought it might come to this lower portion, bounce out, and then make it through the top. Right now, it's getting sold back down pretty hard at 39 cents, about 40 cents. So it did push up to the highest rejection point, and then it kind of sold back down. Okay. It's a lot. It's up quite a bit. Some of you guys are in Doge. We talked about Doge breaking out quite a few times. That went way high. It went to like at least 30 cents, right? That one finally broke. Pretty much what we expected. It went down from 12, 13 cents, and then it dropped back again, and then it rallied, pushed up. My idea was that it would probably stop at 16 or 17 cents and then continue after that. And I don't know exactly what happened. I wasn't watching it all weekend, but I could take a look. But I don't think, I don't know if it really made any kind of major backup there. It's at 32 cents now. So, yeah, another pretty good one called out. Yeah, I mean, it looks solid. We figured if it broke out here, it would just continue. So it didn't end up needing to come all the way back down to 13. It just came down to like 14, and then it broke right back out. So pretty fast. Yeah, actually it did a good job of like stair stepping out. It went like 1, 2, 3 instead of like all the way up and then back down. Because I think what I had on the chart was that it would go all the way up, like past this. This is what this idea was. It would go all the way up here and then go down. Instead it just hit each one. So yeah, there it is at 16, 17 breaking out. That was the red zone. So it would probably need to break there if it was going to continue. And then it did. I wish I had put more money into it, but it is what it is, you know. Really solid. I don't think this move even remotely over, because this is like historically like a huge motion for Doge. So if you're wondering like if you've missed out, mean, there could be some serious backup here, but I genuinely think this could be squeezing really, really far, really, really fast. The only major stopping points we have are at like 40 cents, and then up at the top here at 73 cents. That's it. Like, I don't really see a lot of other place to distribute here. Pretty much to the first one. So I think if it pushes above, it's going to go. Seems ridiculous. Yeah, it is. That's where it is. I don't know what to tell you. Like, we looked at this chart as if it were just a normal chart. It just so happens to be like a 7,000% move over the next, couple of years. I mean, it is what it is. Like, I don't know exactly how it's going to work out here in the middle, but pretty wild, right? So anyways, coming back to AMC. Oh, I forgot about GME. So GME actually took off first on Friday. We weren't streaming when it did, but I gave you guys this chart last week, and there it is. Like, the first target's basically been met. It's gone there really fast, so I'm wondering if we chill out a little longer here in the middle, or if we're going to have like more of a kind of a double up thrust. You can have a motion here that sells down, then comes back up, you know what I mean, through like the next week. Just kind of a big U shape, and then maybe comes back down a little harder before the earnings. I don't really have any guarantees here about earnings, I mean, it's very possible the run-up goes into the 4th or the 5th, whenever they announce the official date. It's very possible it kind of bleeds down before. I just know that there's some logical places to step back to at 25.75, and that ultimately what I was saying is I thought we'd hit 28.40 through 29.30 somewhere before the 18th of November. That's what my TA was saying. We hit 28.05, so we didn't quite get to where I thought we would get to, but we're really darn close. So hopefully you guys don't begrudge me like 30 cents. If you happen to trade that, congratulations. This is how it is, man. When AMC and GME finally begin to move, it's like all of the TA that you are doing becomes very, very relevant. Sometimes you're getting these situations where you might break out and it doesn't do it, and then all of a sudden you feel like you're wasting your time. But as soon as it becomes relevant, it's like spot on. No one's going to sit here and tell me that there's no way to have predicted this. And you guys are waiting for Roaring Kitty. Did he ever make a thing? Yeah, you can join Last Riot. I'll get to you when I can. Did Roaring Kitty ever make a tweet? I don't think he did, which is good because they can't blame him for doing it. Yeah, Jimmy, I don't know what to tell you other than like there's a huge amount of evidence that I'm not presenting and I'm not going to present. So you shouldn't trade off of what I say anyways. There's a significant correlation to this 869 level that was found kind of late in the game, but it's there. It's not impossible that it rallies beyond that. And 1380 is one that I've had on my chart for way too long. Like, I won't let it go, that kind of thing. And if you look at the P&F count here, if it happened to be that this breaks out and it holds today, and it keeps those levels into close, that should be strong enough to continue us forward. But the P&F for this was really high. That's a point and figure chart. point and figure chart relies on not time, but like columns counted and distance traveled. So I know Stockfather did a PNF for downside. I did one for upside, and I thought it was considerable. It goes to like really like 16s. It would have been up here. You know, I don't think it's impossible. So you've got 869, highly probable in my opinion. There's basically like a doubling of that number to get to the next. It's like a percentage doubling to get to the next level, which is at like 1380. You can see it's like a halfway point. And then I think there's an extension level of 16. But I don't necessarily think it needs to do that. I think that they have enough. If they wanted to set up a distribution at 869, then they have enough to get there, get back down. It's plenty. The argument earlier was that you needed to come up high. A lot of the argument that I made earlier was that you needed to come up that high to meet certain criteria on these waveforms, that it would definitely come back up and hit this particular marker because of the waves. And then ultimately, like, the flush would go really low, like to the low twos. But upon reviewing it again and looking at the data more clearly, the distance that needs to be traveled does not need to be significant. In order to kind of set it up for a June run next year, we don't need to go up to 13s. It's not necessary. You could kind of build it out, 869 back down to fill the gap. It's enough. And that's the evidence that I found in the structural setup here, that there was a significant 50-50 here that was set up. And we have the same one right here. You don't need it to go higher. It's not necessary. It's just enough to get to a gap fill and then kind of bounce out and head low. And it doesn't have to go that low. It can go, you know, barely below the bottom, or it can go even just barely below 3, potentially. And then the rest of this, honestly, and this is another reason why I think you don't need to go to 13s, although there might be a hit there. It's not impossible. The rest of this worked out essentially perfectly. Timing wise, it's exactly 1-to-1 with what happened in 2020, which is almost too easy. I don't like that, but it is what it is. Like, the way this sets up mathematically is on a wave is basically like perfect, where you come back at the 50% marker to meet the top again. And I've done this again dozens of times in different ways. I don't really want to go through it all again and again and again and again and again. I've got like 4 different charts for AMC. I'm sure one of them has it on there. The comparison that I was using today and last week has mostly been the March 2022 run up because of the setup going into this bottom. It's just very similar. So you look for the same markers, not because it's some kind of a fractal copy necessarily, but because the markers would signify like where would the breakouts be. If you study the past, sometimes it can help inform you. But this particular setup here, yeah, let's use the chart on this side. This one's kind of messy. It's more up close. This one's messy too. Yeah, the particular setup here just has no need to go above like $9. It just doesn't need to. Because you've already established like a creek here at around 9. And then you jump that creek later. So the timing of it's like perfect on the wave. And this, by the way, is a copy and paste wave. It's exactly the same. It's a copy paste wave of what happened here in 2020. So if you're going to create an accumulative bottom, you would advance here in a phase B. Phase B does typically have, it can have like a second top, which is why I was using this red marker, because in theory this should go straight up to the red marker, right? Which would be like near 14, high 13s, 14. But the issue is that if you look at the major trends, that's not necessary. Like, you don't have to do that. The catalyst moments are kind of here in the middle. And all you need to do is kind of push into it, distribute in this region, and you've got plenty to come back down to a gap and then possibly get through. And you get to an SOS later, which is the SOS is what brings you back up. That's the same thing that happened in 2000 and it was a 2-year cycle. It was the same thing that happened back here in 2021. And if you think it's all accidental, it's not. If you go back and you look at the middle of that wave, it's a perfect retracement over time. Like it's a mirror retracement. The distance between the time it left, now it says $68, and the time it came back there, it's perfectly on a wave. So, and then again, when it took off from the next target, it was an additional like blockage, you know, on the other side. So what I'm doing is I'm using that same motif and I'm calculating it based on a number of things. And we've talked about this, and there's a couple different ways to do this wave and so on and so forth. But one of the things that we were doing was using this as a measure here. And that's kind of where we're at now, is you're on a gigantic sine wave. So the movement back up should flow along this path. However, you're not ready to break out yet. You're just doing a second wave here. So it's a 1, 2, 3, and then you're back down. So what's necessary is to then create some kind of a distribution along this wave to get you back to the bottom. And this is where the argument's been that I don't think you need to go very high just to get back to the gap. Super easy to do that. You just don't. Even just to get back to 280, the implied move just doesn't need to come above $. So everything else beyond that is kind of a bonus. And I think that you're going to see that if it does go to like 18 or 13 or something, you're going to get like a leg down that probably is about equivalent. So careful what you wish for is what I'm saying. Because this could end up near like low 2s or even below 2. So what's your theory on the big run next year? And we got a lot of new people, which is good. May into June. It's a June run up. I don't think it's a January run up. So it looks like we dumped back down, which is not good. So I was worried about that. So I came on here all excited. But my main concern was that you do another head fake here, and then if you sell back beneath the floor, that's not a good thing. So this is kind of like this latent scenario where you push up and then you come back down. This is the one we talked about a little bit. We talked about last week because it's possible that this could end up being like a UTAD, which is an upthrust after distribution. If you don't know what that means. It means that you've started a distribution, but then you're getting like a latent upthrust. Can't be both, right? It's either a breakout or it's not. It's either going to get that buy-in volume and we're going to take off, or we're not, right? And you don't want like a double upthrust here. Boom, boom, right? That's making lower lows that then slides beneath the creek each time. It's not positive if it does that. So here we are again, right back to the same point. You guys are like, this chart, man. You can't even be happy when it's up 5%. Maybe not. We'll see. I'm more concerned to see if it just holds here above 450 today. I think if it can get it back above there, and somebody's selling it pretty hard, this could just be like a series of cat ears that are distributing, selling it back down. So you don't want to see that upthrust after distribution. Huge volume candle, not terrible sell-off, but it did only come up to, it did not make it higher than like 464, which was the level that we were saying like last time. If you look at where the floor actually is, it's like 461 to 464. It's a bizarre little number. So in theory, this could just be, I hate that for us, but it could just be another rejection. You want to see it push up and then hold support. And if it doesn't, then it's pretty much just like November 6th all over again. So which is it, Booksy? I don't know. Confirmation, confirmation, confirmation. The bullish setup here is pretty straightforward. It's very simple. But you have to also get the setup. Like, you have to finish it. You can't just like say, oh, it's there, so we're going to do it. No. That's not how technical analysis works, and that's not how the market works. So what you don't want to see is you don't want to see a sell back through this creek. It's okay if it comes back to check it, but you want to see it kind of bounce out, almost like floating. Like as if sellers can't push it back down. I'm going to go in a little bit closer so I can see the nitty gritty of it. Let's actually just go way in. Let's just go to like 6 minute. All right, so it's sitting right on the mark right now. Yeah, it's sandwiched between 465 and pretty much where we are at 450, which were the levels that were called out earlier. Yeah, so you can see the danger here if it does not hold. It's pretty self-evident. So somebody doesn't want it to hold. They're selling it as hard as it can back down underneath 450. I've already done that, Jason. We talked about the timing of it a few times. I know you're in and out, so I don't have to think very hard about it. November like 22nd through like December 6th, there's like a 2-week period right there, basically Thanksgiving. It's the most likely place to come up to the 9s if you're going to go up because of certain trajectories that build out to that particular time and place. As in, like, I would have no problem saying that as long as there's follow through at each level that it would get there at that time. We know from past experience that trajectories don't always work the way you think they should. Sometimes you're witnessing something that's pretty much just like the basin of a wave, and you're seeing like bullish trajectories that will never get hit. Other times they really are building out a particular price in mind, and you have to pay attention to them. There's no doubt in my mind, we've talked about it quite a bit, that's a real thing. And specifically on like the big picture, if you look at the build out from like 2016 all the way through the 2021 run on AMC, there's absolutely like massive bull trends that suggest that you would hit 72 at that time. There are some smaller ones that are more short term and they don't actually reach to that end. But in the case of AMC right now, like, there's not much else here, you know, to go off of. Like, I've already kind of done the work, and I don't see it as highly likely that it hits at a much later date or a much earlier date. But who knows, man? If this holds tonight, you could have a really big move tomorrow. All that needs to happen is it needs to just hold here. So you need to see it push up. You need to see it kind of hold. Ideally, this kind of comes up, flattens out, and then goes again. Something like that, right? Would be best. That's pretty much all I want to see right now. Everything else to me is like, meh. You know, I don't really care. If it doesn't happen in the time that I think is going to happen in, that's okay. You know. And this is why you would see that, because if you make the advancement, it should do this. Right over that creek body. That push on resistance there should be met and then breached. So this is a really important moment for AMC right there. Like, if you've been waiting around like I have for like 5 or 6 months and you're wondering like, when is this going to happen? I hate to say now or never, but we've had a lot of these setups that have failed, and this is definitely the most we've interacted at all in months with this creek body. And based on where we are, it's either a spring or it's not, or it's an LSPY. So, which means it's either a spring or it's a bear flag. So it's going to either run back to the top of the range, more than likely, reverse essentially, or it's going to dump. And we've been in situations like this before where I've said, hey, it's got to make a decision. And unfortunately, we've been up here before and it didn't make the decision the way we wanted to go. And then you end up spending months to the downside. We're kind of at a crossroads again right now. So there's a element of excitement in the air for sure. But also like the timing right here is pretty critical. If I went back below this creek again, you might say, well, can you still advance? What if well, not really. Like that doesn't confirm any advancement because we didn't make a higher high. We made a lower high. And all we really did was push above so that's a lower high than the one up here, right? And all we did was push back above the creek and sell back down. So like losing that level is very significant. It looks like it closed right on the mark, so we will see. I would venture that it held it because it looks like it's right there. Kind of a bit of a weakness here in that it bled beneath. You can see that when the selling volume really picked up, I'm as close as I'm willing to get with this, and I think it's correct, the mark that I'm looking at right now. I think it's right. About as far as I'd like to go. It would have been nice if it had stayed at above 450, but this is a little bit of a weakness. Anytime you see it kind of push below something, you have to just keep in mind that it means that sellers had the ability to do it. There was not a strong enough wall there. Sometimes the sell test can get out of hand. Buyers still pushed it back up and closed above. So I think, without overcomplicating it, I think it looks okay. Like it looks good. There's other things we could say that may be a little more complicated, but so far it looks okay. Like if it drops tomorrow and it comes back below 449 again, we're going to have some conversations. If it chops sideways for more than a day or so here, we're going to have some conversations. Reality is that if this is ready to go and it's a smart money buy-in and it's a successful buy-in, then you should advance fairly quickly. I think tomorrow, Tuesday the 12th, would be a day of a lot. Like you'd probably at least come up here and break above 460. You should get that support tomorrow if it's really truly going. And then I think Wednesday is kind of your big day. Wednesday into maybe Friday. You could easily be all the way back up here. Frankly, I think I had estimated like it could park itself at like 5 on Friday, but it may very well make it all the way to the 6s. So the walkout here could be substantial. Wouldn't surprise me if they held it at like 5 this week and then just rallied on the 18th. That's another possibility, like a Monday, the 18th rally or something. But there's enough time here. Like there's enough space here. I mean, like you could pretty easily make it all the way to the SOS and end the week at like above 550. So GME makes me a little nervous because GME has moved so quickly to that upper target that I don't know what to expect. Like it can still go up more, a little bit more, but once it hits that pocket at 29.30, I think you're going to have some selling. So there's probably going to be some chop here. I'm a little nervous what that means for AMC, but there's been times where like that happened in May, I think on GME as well. So like there's a markup here that pushed up pretty high on May 3rd, and then AMC didn't run until the 10th. So this was chopping sideways. AMC was going down. And then it marked up pretty big time, and then they ran together. So in theory, this chop right here could happen going into the week of the 18th, which would put AMC in a very interesting place if it doesn't hold right here. So right now, it's kind of on the wire. It looks like it ended at 449. It's like right there. Some people are going to probably say it's kind of bearish. I don't think it is. I think the fact that it held that creek and didn't break below it is really significant. Like this right here, this intersection, very, very important. I think the fact that it held it. So I've got different charts for different things, but the creek is the same. I mean, it was down really low. So, yeah. Yeah, we'll see. Sometimes during these run-ups, if it does run, that movement can be highly unpredictable in extended hours. Booksy's really the king of vagueness. That's funny. I think that's a fair thing to say, except that there's not really like a way to be 100% certain about anything in the market. So it would be really silly to sit there with like, you can always be like 99% confident, but if you get to that 100%, probably something off. Because as much as I want to be really confident about the timing of this, and like we talk about targets, say, oh, it might do this or it might do that. My job is not to give people targets. My job has been to study the chart and to get better at it and to make money myself doing it. And ultimately, like if you happen to make money and you're following along, that's great. But the concept of this as a vague thing, this is not vague at all. Like that's why I was kind of chuckling. It's like, yeah, on the one hand, I can sit there and say a penny makes a big difference. I'm not really sure. Who's going to be sure about that? Somebody that's overly confident. If I keep it really simple, it looked like it closed above the creek to me. That's what it looks like. Black and white. But I can't be that confident. This is not possible. It's a penny. It's literally a penny difference. If I say this is what should happen if we're going to get confirmation, that's just me saying if-then statements. That's not vagueness. This being a confusing moment shouldn't be in question either. So like again, the fact that this went up and then came back low to check that creek, I think it's a purposely vague thing, and I think it makes perfect sense. And I think if you went to any of the other channels on YouTube, they were saying this is really bearish. As far as I can tell, I'm one of the last holdouts for a potential bullish move here. So like that doesn't sound like vagueness to me. Like me saying that I think this is going to happen is really not vague. Like if it makes the break here, it's going to go to SOS, and then if it makes the break there, it's going to go to 869. Like that's not vague. So I don't know, man. I feel like I'm pretty vague when I need to be because that's what the chart is. If the chart's vague, it's vague. If the chart seems pretty confident and comfortable with a confirmation, then it's done. But the same thing happened up here too, you know, like we pushed above and then we came back down and we sat on top of that mark and it looked right. It looked like it did exactly what it should have done. I mean, it just did. But the very next day, it's breaking down below. And extended hours is dropping, and yeah, it was earnings, but still, it's like there's an issue with that. Somebody pushed it up high in order to bring it down low. Then you have to answer the question, why would they do that? And the only thing I can give for an answer is like it's like March, that run up where you have that ascending accumulation and then you're dropping it back down to support to buy back in. It's a final bear trap if that's the case, and it's it's a final buy-in as well. It's like a resetting. So you're basically coming up and then coming back down to check that floor before leaving. But I can't really apologize for, I'm not going to apologize for not knowing whether or not it's confirmed. If it's clear, it's clear. The good news is, and I'll tell you this, the good news is that we ran up with an hour to go. So we started like an hour before close. That is good. The fact that it had time to come up here and come back down is really positive. Like, I really don't like it when I see like a move up. If this had like run up into close, like just been right over here and just stopped, I would have been far more like, this stinks. Because it came up and it came back down, they actually gave it plenty of time to get the sell-off. That's good. That's like healthier price action. I do not like it when it runs last possible second because there's no confirmation whatsoever. At least here you have a backup to what appears to be the creek. So that's a positive. And again, if I'm just going to be black and white, I would say it looks like it closed above. It pushed up, big volume push up, yeah. I do see some selling, but a lot of the volume is in this first push here. And then sold off, decent sell-off volume, but it held. So a lot of effort by sellers to not move very far. That's a positive sign. But for the sake of being, succinct, I think you have to just kind of look back and say, this kind of happened before. And you don't really ever know with after hours and pre-market price movement, So for me, if I were looking at this and saying, where's confirmation? Where's confirmation? I think somebody on the chat said it earlier. They said waiting until it gets back above 480. That's correct. Confirmation is making a higher high and then building support. It's that simple in the market. This could be a whip around that whips way back up to the top, like a double move, or it could be a head fake. The volume, it could be read either way. I think right now there's a part of me that thinks that maybe the volume is favoring the bears to keep people on their toes, like it was over here. There's that high volume push with the high volume sell. This looks a little bit healthier to me, but UT and UTAD, which is up thrust and up thrust after distribution, both have high volume going into a top because you get a lot of sellers picking it up. And the same would be true for a spring going down, So there's elements of this that still kind of reek of distribution. Like you have that high volume right into here and here. It needs to follow through. So if this is indeed like a buy-in, you will see it follow through. You'll get decent to heavy volume Tuesday and you'll get a big buy-in that pushes you up. And it should make a higher high going up to at least the 490s. And then at that point, you should see again some kind of a backup to the top, 480, and then take off. I know. If I'm too specific, people don't like it either because you can't have it both ways really. If you're really, really specific and it misses the target and it's just a big whiff, right? And then it seems like you're scrambling to change your TA. If you're too vague, then you can sit there and always claim that you were right, which is kind of what some people do, is they put every scenario on the screen and then they say, well, I'm right because I put every scenario. I already talked about it last week, but I said it and I'm going to say it again. I will sit here and say I was wrong if it does distribute here. I will tell you, okay, I was wrong. I thought it was going to go, period. Do I know where it goes if it sells off? Probably. We've talked about downside here quite a bit. And this is a possibility, I even have on here like a UTAD motion as a possibility. Like it's not withstanding, like this could totally happen. So you have to like keep in mind this was on my chart as well. It's not just a simple like, oh, it goes up, that's it. That doesn't mean I'm going to sit here and say I was right. It just means that that's a possibility. So you have to keep in mind like the market is a market for us anyways of probability and possibility. Lots of things are possible, not everything is probable. Based on the way this is set up, it's set up like a really, really smart bear trap or a really, really good bull trap. And that's kind of where we're at. We're doing a huge like quadruple flush like right along a creek. So you're getting a lot of both sides probably. I think there's probably plenty of people out there who don't think this is enough. Like they'll say tonight it went high, but it wicked back down. It's going to sell through and just keep going down. They might be right. They could do that. This is a question of maybe. Like I can't answer that question yet. What I see is a breakdown of a rising, widening that ultimately reversed by double bottoming on 417, which is also like a creek hit, which is a big deal because that's very, very similar to what happened in the March run up after the advancement. And the advancement didn't happen until November 6th, and that's key here. I thought the advancement happened on October 30th, and it just didn't come high enough, which is something that I was debating. And I want to go back full circle to the beginning of the stream, but that's kind of where I started the stream today was like, there was an issue that I had with this is that it didn't come high enough. And I thought if it's already done that move and backing up, maybe it just goes. In reality, it still came higher. It did do the move. It didn't do it in a way I liked. It did it in a way that looked like it was going to sell down, and then it did. But it held the creek. You can't really complain when you look at this setup and say that it couldn't be bullish. It definitely looks like it could be. So we're just waiting. Like this is such an easy thing to tell. I'm serious. Like if it advances above this creek and it holds above this creek, it will advance and it will go. If it does not, then it won't. It's super simple. So you have a measurement here that's very, very straightforward. Like we're right there. If it drops below, then you can decide if you want to be patient and wait or see if it goes again, or you can just say, all right, I'm done, for now, whatever. That's your choice. Here's what bearishness would look like at this point. It probably would be like, again, like a cat ear situation where you get a secondary micro UTAD underneath the bigger one. So this looks very wide. And then it sells back down and it would go all the way through the floor at $4. Now, I think Splits in the Discord was thinking this might happen. So there are people out there who are trading this that think this is still possibly bullish because it could be like a spring. Why are they saying that? Well, I'm not 100% sure it could be. I think this seems more likely to be like a support and then build out and go. Again, I have reasons for that. But I think ultimately what they're thinking is that this was a phase B bottom here at $4.03. This is pushing against the creek, but it's not going to go. Then it's going to dump into a spring, come really low to like the 390s or something, and then reverse. And that's really where you get the actual quote unquote, squeezing motion. I don't think that's an illegitimate claim. I think that there's a lot of setups that have happened like that. You get an acceleration like this, and then it dumps down again, and then you get a second one that's like really fast, and the whole thing just looks like a massive double bottom kind of setup with a spring, or maybe a better way is like a phase B top going down into a localized spring on a bigger picture. So is that a possibility? Sure. This is where things devolve into like an infinite number of possibilities, right? It's like, well, then all of a sudden this looks like a huge, wedge coming down, and you're not breaking out and running into November, the end of November. You're actually doing the opposite. right? You're going down into the end of November. You don't break out till early December, and then it could be like a really fast 1 or 2 week run, and that's it, you know? And who knows where that goes? I mean, it could be stopping at 5 or 6 or go up to 8 or 9. That's a completely different situation. Does that look possible to me? Sure. Do I think they want to come back and get $4 again? Yeah. I'm just not sure they're going to do it right now. That's the question. I think if you've made the advancement high, you back up, you hold the creek, and you can jump the main one again, you should just go. And then the stock father in me is like, well, if it's an LSPY, there's really no reason they can't just do that again, right? And fail again and just continually trick retail into thinking it's going to go, and it really is just going to compress downward into like a huge downward arc, you know. Sure. Probably be like lower. And that's where a lot of people are right now. A lot of your streamers and junk, I think, those folks. And I'm part of that group, but it's like a lot of people are already thinking, well, it's not going to go. It's going to drop low and come down to the 350s. In which case, this is just a bear flag. Then you get another bear flag, and then another, all the way down. Straightforward. So like, we can sit and talk about every single scenario, or we can just kind of focus on what's happening right now. And right now, you're seeing a big volume push that pushed above the creek again. If it holds, you will see an advancement above 462. And if that holds, then you've got chance for confirmation, real confirmation above 480. All of that is within the next day or two, potentially. And then before you know it, you're rocketing up to 6. I have to be just clear that, like, yeah, like, every time you're approaching a supply level, there's a kind of a given involved in that you could stop there. There's always something that could stop you. You know, there's something that could stop you at 520. There's something that could stop you at 480. There's something that could stop you at 6, but that's just supply. The goal of doing the longer term outlook is to kind of see what the operator really cares about and see if it makes sense to advance all the way. And if it does, I think there's a higher probability. So we'll see. Tomorrow's a new day. And my title is like nearly unflinching. Because I have been a little bit vague about this move. I think it'll go that high. I think it'll go up there, but I think it's going to go there in 2026, by 2026. It'll be like end of next year. It'll be up at like $80 or something. Do I think that new all-time highs are possible? No, not within the next couple of years. But for a lot of people, getting up to like the 80s is probably enough. If you've been doing any kind of averaging, you're going to be fine by the time it gets there. I think AMC is going to $80 by the end of 2025. Yeah. Also, another one of those things that I've kind of had on my chart for a long time. I think I've had it on since January of this year because I did a macro analysis back then where I thought it was going to go from 14 up to 14 and then go back down to 2, that it would kind of bang its head against the top here and then go back down to 2 repeatedly. And that's kind of what's happening. But then there was a wave that I drew way back near the beginning of the year. It was one of the first videos I did of the year. And that wave was long term. It was very slow, and it takes you through most of 2025 up to about February of 2026. Recent data suggests that the move itself probably starts long before then. It's not going to be like an overnight thing. So you have like a 6-month window starting in mid-2025 all the way up to 2026 where you could have that walkout. This is a really big macro analysis view that I've used quite a bit on this stream, and it's not that complicated. It really isn't. There's some things about it that might be a little bit hard to understand perhaps, but the big picture is actually quite simple. There's a really long downtrend. We've hit the bottom of it. The last time we hit the bottom of it was 2020. We're forming what appears to be a very large bottom presently. We're doing that right now. And if it's successful and you get a buy-in, then you should head towards the top of the channel. When you look at wave analytics, you can see that the wave analytics actually suggest the wave measures out pretty evenly, and it gets you back to these historically important levels, which is really why I think this makes sense, because basically it takes you back at most to the original opening price of AMC. Oddly, if you look at the move itself, it's essentially like a cookie cutter move. And this is another reason why I don't think it's going to advance right now, because the timing of that would be wonky. It broke the same way back in 2021. It looks different enough that a lot of folks probably don't think it's the same, but I think it's pretty much the same. And then this motif right here on this wave, this whip around, again, it kind of terminates, no matter how I do the chart, it always terminates in the same spot. So I've gone through this a number of times, and it's basically that same pocket, 60 to 80, maybe 100 at most, but it's really about 60 to 80 bucks. Funny enough, of course, these numbers sound very similar to what happened in that January run-up. So what began as sort of this idea that you're going to come back up and hook here, basically, which is still the way I see it. Like, this is a wave up, wave back down, that you're eventually going to come back up to that particular angled wave, then turned into a really simple, oh, it's a channel. Then it turned into a very simple, this is where it broke out of the channel. And then you have a lot of other things to consider with this downside, but ultimately this is just a big accumulation. It's a Wyckoffean accumulation. Auto reaction, phase B top, spring. Then it took off. It met the markers that it was supposed to meet. And it just so happens that this particular angle on this marker for this build out on this massive trend matches the trajectory target of the sine wave, which is, again, sometime late 2025. That's pretty much the gist of it. So this may look complicated, it's not. It's very simple. And a lot of this is based on this diagram that I've talked about before. This is something you see on AMC all over the place. We saw it here. The first time I really saw it was in August 2021. It's a bottoming structure on a wave. It's essentially like a Wyckoffean build out that can turn distributive, but it's there. It's all there, and it's just a simple one up, down, up kind of motion. It's an S curve on the bottom. Now within that are micro iterations. It's the same thing down here. If you look closely, you'll see the same kind of up, down, up stuff until eventually it capitulates one way or the other. But the point is like this build out is not something new. This is something we've seen all over AMC. It's the way it's been traded for the last 2-3 years. So I'm not suggesting something profound. I'm actually suggesting that it continues to behave the same way. And if it does, there's no reason we shouldn't get back to $72. It'll be a $72 after a reverse split / ape thing. So there's obviously some maybe misleading numbers there, but yeah, I don't get back there. And then I think what makes the most sense is that it backs up again to like 14s, and then it takes another couple of years and breaks out later. That's when I think you might finally see an actual advancement, so to speak. It's not impossible that it breaks out here, but I just don't think it will. I think it's going to come back down, and if it does have bullish behavior in it, it'll assume like a new bottom, and then it'll break out here later and probably head up to 250s or something. And that, again, it's positioned around 2029. I mean, that kind of stuff I don't think is an accident. The fact that they extended their debt to that time makes sense to me. I think it's a good possibility that you see something similar with a sell back down that doesn't eventually end, or doesn't end until near 2029. So I don't have any personal skin beyond even going here. Like if we went up to 80s, like I would be fine. I would break even, but like, or go even above it, quite a bit. I think my average is down in the 20s. So for me, it's not really about, oh, I have to get to this price. So I'm not going to sit here like with a bias on my shoulder and say, I think it's going to go to, $500, because in the back of my head, I always think when people say that, they may be in really deep, or they're just really looking for a certain number. Like they want to hit $1 million or something. So what's the number? So I'm going to find a scenario that fits. I don't really think that's what's going on here. Usually what happens is that you get the build out back to at least this top area. So it'll be between 45 and 80, which sounds like a lot, but percentage wise, it's a small percentage region in the top here, smaller percentage region in the top here. And I think that's the area that is in contention. And when you look back at the chart, historically, there's not really any other place that's in contention after you bottom out. You kind of head right back to that top. It's where the LSPY was on that first breakdown back in 2017-18. So it's the place you're going to kind of hold or not hold. And the short term supports this. Like I already said, there's a wave here that's being built out. This is a cookie cutter wave. This J shape right here, it's like a cookie cutter J shape to the one that we have in 2020. It's exactly the same. And on the parallels, like it's hitting the same notes. We're in the same region right here. It's freaky. There's a gap up at the same exact point on these parallels after it hits the low. It's the same distance from the low to the gap up, basically. If you look carefully, and you can see it builds out, and then it races up high. And then you look at where it raced up to, it's like, oh, it raced up to back here in May of 2020. It raced up to the top. Well, look, that's where the marker is now. There's nothing like particularly new about any of this. I heard Stockfather say in his video that he didn't know why it ran that high. I thought that was kind of interesting, but Wyckoff doesn't really use trends and stuff like the same way that like an Elliott wave person might, or doing sine wave person might. You know what I mean? Like they just don't do it. So for him, it's like, I see why, like maybe it went up to this pocket, and I can see why you might go up there again, either to 860s or up to 13. I don't see why you'd go anywhere beyond that based on what we're seeing here until you're ready to break out finally. So I've done this like a dozen different ways, and it kind of always leads to the same thing. Ultimately, like this kind of all ends February 2026. If you look at the major wave, there's not much else beyond that. And then like the information wise, and then like it is assuming that you go back up. There's a lot of things in that. But the timing of the bottom doesn't have any urgency to it. That's the other thing that I think maybe irritates some folks, is that they think there's like an urgency that it's going to hit here and just take off. Well, like the guy said, he's like, will you stop believing in TA if it just raced up to 100 right now? No, I wouldn't, because I know I've done the same thing on other charts and it works even better. You know, AMC's a weird one. It doesn't always work the way you think it should. So it's a bit silly for me to be like, oh, I'm never going to like look at TA again if it doesn't do exactly what I think it's going to do. That's silly, right? That's also thinking a bit highly of myself, like, oh, it couldn't possibly be different. Well, it could. You know, that'd be kind of silly. But like, the idea here that this is some kind of an urgent matter and it has to be attended to right now, so race up right now or it's never going to go, like that doesn't make sense to me. This has a massive 10-month plus, you know, area on the bottom. Once it hits the bottom, we do not have that same thing here. You know, we're approaching like those time periods, but it's not like the urgency is not there. It's just not. So I find it to be a bit bizarre to me. Like, I don't even see a whole lot of urgency technically to go over 6. I don't want to say that like too much because people are like, what? You just said... I know, but like even if it only went up to 6 and it distributed down, this would still be like a cat ear with an upthrust. Like it'd still be like a sell down wave, like 1, 2. It's just not. I don't know, man. I think they purposely established these levels coming down from 13 all the way to 2, just like they did back in March when it dropped February 2020 all the way down into April, and I don't think it's an accident that then they traversed all that area again over time. I think we're going to do something similar. So what I'm looking for right now is not a move to all-time highs all of a sudden because it raced up 8% and then dropped 3%, ended at 5% on the day. I'm looking for a move back up to wave check, either get above 6 or not, and then go up to $8 or $9. And then anything beyond that is just kind of bonus round material for me. I don't see it as a necessity. So I don't think the operator does either. And if long term the operator wants to come back down to 2s and 3s, they will. There's also this kind of idea that like you can't, it's too low or you can't predict it if it's going to come down there. I don't know. They left a giant gap. They kind of gave you a roadmap with a lot of levels coming down here. There's huge gaps in liquidity between 350 and 4. There's huge gaps of liquidity below 297. Like, if they want to do it, they'll do it, you know. They have to first instigate like some major selling, which I think is partially why they did this and why they may be getting a buy-in now to bring it up and sell it back down again. So you get a second sell down. Anyways, I digress. That's as much as you're going to get from me for long term today. So short term, keep it really simple. It needs to hold above 450. It basically did do the jump over the creek again. So at this point, if it can hold here, you're gonna kind of mark off 450. You're gonna mark off 460, and you're gonna mark off 480. Super simple. Those are the 3 main points. Hits ball 3 of those and holds. I think it's gonna be very likely this goes back up to 6s. I think it'll jump like a whole dollar really quick. I do. I don't think there's a lot there to stop it. You might be like, well, why can't it stop here, here, here? Really, the high liquidity marker is at like just above 480. It's at like 493 or something. The high liquidity is right here. So we've already traded all of this for a long time. So there's really no reason to trade it again. If the spring is successful, you'll pass from, again, about 490 all the way up to 550. Like, you'll pass through that really quick. You won't bother with it because we don't retrade a region like sideways on the markup on a markup phase. You just don't. You'll get little stops, but you won't get like a sideways, long sideways period. Not typically. So in my opinion, like, this has got to go. Next couple of days, if it craps out this week and does some weird hooking cat ear stuff underneath that creek again, you'll hear me be a little bit more bearish again, kind of flip-flop. have to order another debit card. I think I lost it. Sorry, just fiddling with stuff. Man, why did it do this? It was here. It's gone. I'll find it. So the way it's set up is it's set up really similar again to 2020. So what happened is we had a bottom and then it looked like it was over. It gapped up. There's a huge buy-in. There's a lot of liquidity. A lot of people think that this is because this eclipsed the volume, and it does, that somehow means that it's not going to be the same. And I agree. There's elements of that are very, very profound. Like we talk about that volume for weeks. You know, what happened back in May is crazy. But there was a similar buy-in in 2020 on the bottom when it dropped March to April. There's a pretty significant volume spike that happens. A lot of people don't think about that when they're thinking about that range, but it does go all the way back to where it dropped from in March. It does a full retracement. That's an auto reaction. That's a lot like what happened here. This is like a massive auto reaction in my opinion. Like it goes all the way back up to where it started dropping. So the downside took a lot longer here, but it ultimately builds out the same way. Like it comes back, then it gaps up from that place and rockets with a high amount of volume. What happened in the March run up then led into what happened in like a double top kind of scenario for AMC in 2020, eventually to come back down and get the gap fill, and it does by doing a double flush. It flushes up and then flushes back down. When that happened, they got the liquidity they needed to dump it. They dumped it all the way down to the gap, and then they bounce out, and then they go down again. They're using the local creek only at that point. They stopped using like the main creeks. And at that point, you're kind of like a little bit lost, and I think that's intentional. But ultimately, it doesn't break out until it gets to near the end of the wave. And this is where the slingshot mentality comes back in, because depending on how low it goes, often will determine how high it goes. So if it goes below this floor to like 226, that's where roughly that floor would be confirmed, right? Down near the bottom there at 240. Let's say it goes to 226. Well, we know the center liquidity here is at like basically at just below 6. That's where the middle is. That's exactly the way it's built out in 2020, by the way. You can see the whip around, and ultimately when it goes through there, it does a 50-50 right around the middle liquidity, which is also like the middle of the wave. That's why it seems like the whole market takes off without AMC, and then AMC lags behind for months, and then it takes off finally. It just does this massive catch up, but it's really just a pushing away from and then reacting to. It's a fairly simple formula, which is why I use these 50-50 terminology so much. So yeah, in theory, what do we need to do to get over this top? That's really the only question. Well, to get over the top, you only need to go a penny above like the 1380s area or 1390s area. It's basically 14. You just need to go barely above that. So that means you really don't have to go much below this floor at all. And based on the way this is set up, it's adequate. Like you could take this down to just underneath like a 235 or something and you'd be fine. It would be enough to get you back above the top. And what's funny about that is then when you look at the macro chart and you look at that setup, it's like not only does that get you back over the top, it lines up with what we're currently setting up as trajectories upward. It also lines up with the build out that was built out way back here. You know, there's all kinds of fun stuff that we did on the chart to look at this. There's like a bajillion different intercepting lines that were built out on this final cat ear that occurred 2023. There's a huge amount of trajectory markers going down And then if you look at that move, oh, it jumps over. Yeah, that jumps over the horizontal, which is enough. You guys will be like, that's exciting. That's an SOS. Yes, it is. What's also exciting is then look at what else it jumps over. It jumps over this big creek that you've had since August 2022, as if they were planning for that to happen, right? It's like, yeah, probably, you know. So in the grand scheme of things, like, there's some elements of this that are unpredictable for sure. Not knowing exactly how high you go right now would be one of them. Other things are like pretty straightforward. Like if you're going to come back down and retest the floor, you're going to come back down to that gap. You're going to come back down to like 2s and 3s, you know. Ultimately, like what this accomplishes is it accomplishes like a million different things, but none of that needs to happen right away. It doesn't need to happen until 2025. Like you could do it now, but you'd have to come way up top to like 18s and stuff. But if you ride the wave and time it out, it doesn't actually intercept there until here. And then everything intersects that marker. All of the trajectories down, all the trajectories up. The wave, the whip around, like everything clicks really well into place if it happens in June. It does, however, demand that you would need to do this, potentially. Now, I say potentially because when you get to that point, there could be an LPS, you know, where it doesn't actually go to a spring. That's happened before. And that if it does an LPS, it would be basically like only going to $2.92 or $3, you know, basically right at the gap. And then you wouldn't have to come back down again. It's possible. This could build out, jump the creek early in like May, and it would run from a much higher place at like 4 instead of being down in the 2s. But I don't personally understand why you'd come all the way down here, have a big auto reaction, and then not try to walk it back down over the next year, which is exactly what an accumulation does. So this might sound vague, but I kind of worked it out that this works really, really well to get basically back to a reset, a 1 year over year reset from March 2024 into March 2025. You're basically in the exact same spot. Perfect for institutional trading who want to keep their books clean. You could basically just reset this back and then have a final sell down going into summer and then take off. And you've successfully done what appears to be a gigantic accumulative model with a breakout. Yeah? It is and it isn't. People have a really short memory. They don't remember that we were already at 238 this year. Like the low of this year was in April. Like you're still in the same year. And that was 238. Right now you're a lot closer to the low than you are to the high. So the idea of it pumping up and then selling back down to that value doesn't faze me at all. Like that's exactly how accumulation works. So one of the things that I wouldn't put past them is this walk back down. I think a lot of people think it's too low or whatever. I mean, there's other folks that were calling for sub $2, like $1, 150s. I don't think it's going to get that low, but who knows? Look, it's pretty straightforward. Like in a Wyckoff accumulation, you hit a bottom, you create a support, you make a phase B top, and then the rest of the phase B is just walking down until you create a jump over the creek, and then you start advancing back to the top. This is assuming that you accumulate, right? You're not distributing, and then that's it. So just a wave up, wave back down. Like it. So most of the time, the problem is that we think that that first bounce has to result in, and it just doesn't. Like the first bounce does not have to result in a reaction. That's like a V bottom, V-shaped bottom. Those happen, but more typically it's like this, right? So it's not to me, it's not even really like confusing. Like, okay, this is the main move here to define the top. I'm messing this up. See what I'm saying? So I don't know. There's a lot of, I don't know what's going on with this thing. It's like messing up. Oh my gosh, I'm trapped. I'm in a loop. Something weird happening. So all I've done is I've managed to look at something like this, and then over a long period of time of like studying the chart, I analyze that there's an upward trajectory right here that matches this, and that's the wave. So that's really a lot of what I've been able to accomplish in the last couple of years, is understanding this as a wave motion, not just as a Wyckoff accumulation or whatever. I can't figure out why this is doing this. My chart is like wigging out. Stop. Why is it doing that, man? It's like I'm hitting some kind of button. I don't know what that button is. Goodness gracious. So, yeah, the only thing I've really managed to do in the last couple of years is distill it as best I can into a simpler understanding of like waveform analytics. And there's a simple pattern to this, which is that there's a 50% marker here that drives you down low, essentially, to the bottom of the wave. And then this ultimately points to the top of the next wave. So almost exclusively, like that would be, if I had to simplify what it is that I've talked about, that's it right there. And then there's some fun stuff, like the distance this goes down below the floor, then goes back above on like a whip around, for example, things like that. We can talk about those things again quite a bit on the stream. There's build outs here on the walk downs and the cat ears. This is like an S curve right here going down, all kinds of fun stuff you can look at from that point forward. But at the end of the day, like, it's very simple. Like, super basic. So what I see right now is like, this is a push up. We may be trying to do a phase B top. Then we're going to come back down, and we just need to achieve this 50-50 to get us back down to the floor. That's how they get enough shares to sell back down, is by bringing it up. They get sellers by going up higher, and they did. If you're wondering if it's successful, they did. They got a ton of sellers from $11 all the way back down to bring it all the way back down to like 5 from 11. So there's no doubt in my mind, like, this pocket's enough, you know. And what's great is that, again, like, the setup here is really clever. If you come to 869 and you do it right, then you have like a really simple elevated creek later when you come back up. You've made a new high. You see how that establishes like a new support later on when you jump? And that support coincides with everything else it needs to. It's a really simple formula. You don't need to come way up here necessarily. So my charts are super ugly and messy, but like they're like that for a reason. I think quantum computers are doing this kind of stuff invisibly. They don't need to know, they don't need a visualization for it to see the data. They're making those trajectory implications on their own. We can't do that, so I just have to do it the way that I know how to do it. And thankfully, there's a lot of pattern in the waveform that it makes it fairly predictable. Easier to do in retrospect, harder to do forward-looking, which is why there's a challenge in what we're doing right now in trying to anticipate that move, because you have to think like an operator, and you also have to think like, why would you do this? The only reason to do this is then to come back to the gap. So the reason I said 869 was so profound is because it is. It goes to the breakdown level, it intersects this uptrend here and the downtrend on the macro, and then it does the perfect 50-50. It's exactly right. around liquidity center here at 5. So if you're going to do a double flush, you'd flush up to 869, flush all the way back down through 5 to get back down to 3, essentially. And then you can bounce out. You meet your yearly cycle in March. You've not moved anywhere. Your position looks the same. BlackRock, Vanguard. Vanguard has 30 million shares. They've had them since before May 10th, probably because they posted it before May 10th, the May run up. So they've definitely got shares all through here. Very likely they do. And frankly, they could be profitable all the way back down to $3 for all we know. They might even be bought in on this bottom in April, you know. There's a lot of things here that you have to consider. They're not hurting like in the way that a lot of AMC retail is. Like they had sold off like 60 million shares and were out of them basically by September, which is part of the reason we came down so far. But they had bought back in, and we have a filing 13F or as early as it's an aggregate filing, so it's not just one part of their company. They've got multiple funds, so it was an aggregate. So it's not a 13F, it's like a 13G, I think. And they had multiple funds that already had shares. They had over 30 million shares before the May run-up. They still had those 30 million shares. We don't know if they bought and sold again, but they did post multiple 13Fs and 13Gs throughout here. They still had them. So, like, how do you get enough selling pressure? I don't know. You enlist somebody else like BlackRock and a couple others, Mudrick, whoever, who also now has like 20 million, right? You enlist all these other guys to sell off. You start to sell off here, they all sell. They're going to take it down pretty easy, you know? So, we'll see. That's my thought about it. I don't know what else to think about it. Again, you know, there's like multiple ways to look at the same information. I think it's important to just kind of consider possibilities and go from there. And right now, I think there's a strong possibility that we're out of that main creek, and we need to look at that as a positive till we hit certain targets. It's kind of all we need to worry about. So up a little bit in pre-market or post-market, excuse me. Not a lot, a few cents. Nothing too crazy. A lot can change. So we'll see what happens by the morning tomorrow. I'm just one guy with a chart, so you have to keep in mind, like, there's a limitation to my ability to predict anything, let alone a stock that's got huge institutional players with tens of millions of shares that can do what they want with. Patterning is really significant, it is, but it's not all there is. There are elements that are less controlled. There's things that are hard to predict. Some people keep mentioning dilution. That's another thing that's like, I'm not really sure. Is dilution something that somebody already knows about? Usually. The setup usually screams distribution before it happens. But could it be a surprise? Yeah. We've had flip-flops. We've had the Judge Zern decision was a huge flip-flop in the chart, not necessarily in the decision itself, because the chart was predominantly bullish, and then what happened was a change of character. And there's a there has to be a terminology for that in Wyckoff. It's called change of character, and the idea is that you're witnessing it essentially change direction or change outcome potential instantly. That's usually signified by a break or of a key support up or down that you weren't expecting, but also it could be like 99% bullish and like everything can be really bullish, and then all of a sudden it goes into some weird distributive actions that don't line up with the rest of the chart. And it would be one thing for like a random dude on YouTube to say it, but there's guys that have, and girls probably, but I just know the guys. There's older guys on YouTube that do Wyckoff that have been doing it their whole career, and they would attest to this idea of change of character. Like it is an interpretation error perhaps at times for sure, but like there are some legitimate times where like, no, your operator just changed their mind. And that can happen if like a company does something or like unknown, or if they do something that's unexpected, or if they miss an earnings by like a huge number, things like that. I don't think that AMC falls into that boat very often. It's usually fairly expected. But it happens. I think Tesla is a good example of one that kind of flip-flop sometimes. It's had some weird changes of character where they were like going to take it up, and then he announces something, and you can clearly tell that there's a big flushing sell-off or something, and then they're taking it back down to reaccumulate or whatever. Like that kind of stuff happens, and you're like, yeah, well, it's because he came out of left field, you know, with this or that. So today, minor victory so far. I would say it looked pretty good after hours. Want to see it hold 450s, want to see it hold 460s and 480s, of course. Those are the big markers for the local area. A drop below that comes back down to 436, in and of itself doesn't kill it. It just doesn't look good. And especially if it then comes up and distributes the rest of the week around under 450. I would not be overly positive about that as a outcome. So we'll see what happens. I hate to kind of jinx it, but that might be the case. We'll see. I'm really hoping this is the sign of the buy-in, the start of the markup here to the top. So GME, I had done this chart. Somebody asked about it. I'll just cover this really quick. I had done this chart very similarly to AMC at different times, and then quite separately at other times. This was very separate. So remember, this was happening, and I was building this out as we were going down on AMC, kind of like not sure about which direction we were going to go heading from the 6th. And I was like, you know, GME doesn't look like it's about to break down. It really looks like it could just kind of take off. So we did an analysis on it, and I came up with two major targets. So one is kind of like a minor guarantee. At this point, it's almost hit it already, so you're like, well, that's not fair. Well, so be it. I didn't draw this after the fact. It was drawn before. And I had drawn out that it would probably get within regular trading hours to between 28.40 and 29.30. I still think it's possible that it hits those marks near exact. It got pretty darn close to the first. I said maybe in extended hours, you might get an extension upward to near 30.80, but ultimately you'd probably need to build out a support at 25. And there was a reason for that, because I looked forward to where we might need to come back to later. And I think 25 is the best candidate. So I said, you know, maybe 25, 25.50, you come back down there. It's a retracement, simple retracement. And then you advance again, potentially. That's a key word. If there's a secondary advancement, I don't think you need to come very far above 36. So a lot of folks are going to look at GME and say that's way too low. It's got to go way higher. It's going to squeeze this. I think it's pretty much the same story as AMC. It's basically like a gigantic cat ear, like a one with a 1 ear, 2 ears. So you have an up thrust and then a UTAD later to try to sell it back down. Not going to go any further than that for now. Do I think it's possible it could race up higher? Sure. It's just like AMC. It could come back up and check that near that top from May, but I don't think it needs to. I've already done the analysis that I want to do on it, and I just don't think it does. I think it only needs to really come up here, and it can distribute from there. And there's a lot of reasons for that historically, that level, that area. It's much like AMC in that regard. And then the sell down, likewise, could be quite violent. Does it have to come low? I don't know. But I genuinely think that it's possible that this actually comes all the way back down through the floor that it started from, just like AMC. And that this could end up here by May and then have this massive, massive takeoff. Not going to be everybody's favorite cup of tea. I get it. We'll get there when we get there. So that's all I got for you guys today. I'm going to head out. Hope you have a good one. And we will talk to you all later.